raise your hand or send a chat message, and Carissa will help us out with that. So I'm very pleased to have all of you attending this first of the 3 webinar series on Knowledge Futures Digital Preservation Planning. I'd like to introduce my co-presenter today, Tom Clareson from LYRASIS. We have done many presentations like this, and we're really pleased to be partnering with DuraSpace on this program. So let's, without further ado, let's move on. We have a fairly lengthy agenda today, so we're going to be moving rather rapidly. The session is being recorded so that if you wish to go back and review anything or share it with your colleagues who were not able to participate today, please do so. You can see from the agenda that Tom and I are going to be sharing, trading off with the different sections. And at the end, as Clarissa mentioned, she is going to be monitoring the questions and answer phase. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to Tom for our first section.
Sure. Thank you, Liz, and I'm glad to be here on the session with today with everyone. So I think you're probably asking, why are we here today and what is this series all about? Why is preserving digital resources an issue? And really, the thing is that for more than a decade, as we've been creating our digital records and our digital materials, we've been addressing the issue of digital preservation more from the perspective of sustainability of the media, reminding everyone of the media formats of our past that have gone away, be it the 8-track tape or the floppy disk or the cassette tape. But one of the things that we think and we have found has been, I think, more holistic and more effective in talking about digital preservation is the idea that there are a series of changes. Sure, we all know that the technology issue is one of the rate of change and the variety of technology, but there are a number of other issues that need to be addressed as well. In addition to things like the storage media and operating systems, we're faced with file format changes, for instance. But we have organizational challenges, the issue of managing the human resources that are associated with digital curation are going to require new skills. And we're doing all of this during a climate of organizational downsizing or right-sizing or reorganization. So our financial resources over the past couple of years are at best level and frequently declining, so adding what we perceive to be a new program can be a little bit frightening. And then our digital collections are continuing to grow because of the nearly insatiable desire of our users to be able to access digital materials. So we've got those organizational challenges. We have some new partnerships and new expectations. The new partnerships traditionally, in the past, our partnerships have been with other libraries in the library community, where we have a common culture and a common set of goals and a common language. But in the digital environment, we have new partners. We've established campus-based partners. We are stewarding faculty and student-created content. We're, in some cases, stewarding institutional records, whether the institution be a campus or the community. We're partnering with other cultural heritage organizations locally and nationally and doing things like reuniting content virtually. So we have a lot of new partnerships. A couple of other areas here, we're partnering with publishers, with content creators, computing organizations, and even the commercial sector while we develop the digital environment. But with these partners, we don't automatically share that common vocabulary or common goals or common vision. And with each community, we have to establish the goals and objectives and find the commonalities. So these are some of the things that we need to look at with the organizational challenges. As the Blue Ribbon Task Force on Sustainable Digital Preservation and Access has noted, the digital preservation stakeholders, the people who are interested in this, all have different goals and objectives. There seems to be somewhat of a misalignment of incentives among our stakeholders between communities that are going to benefit from digital preservation and therefore have an incentive to preserve, and those that are in the position to preserve because they own or control the resource, but they lack the incentives to do it. So we need some policies and policy mechanisms that mitigate these problems. We also have concerns with system architecture. We need systems that support or use non-proprietary components that allow for interoperability, provide the reliability that digital preservation requires. We've got some very standard examples of state-based or multi-state disasters, things that have happened more and more over the past 5 to 10 years that require us to consider how robust our backup and storage management systems are, and finding out that we can get preservation programs that give appropriate levels of security for our digital collections. So these things are being tested all the time. Our system architecture is being tested as far as its disaster robustness and for its security robustness as well. So our information environment requires us to adopt standards for content migration to assure long-term access, and as a result, we can't look at preservation any longer as a separate program, but we need to see it as part of our collection development and management of the total resource offering we're giving to our community of users. So again, technological changes, but there are a lot of other things we need to look at as well. And we're going to talk about some of the policies you can develop and some of the concepts you can use as you go on. A couple more things here. Organizational challenges, a little bit more on those. Well, with technical expertise, you need to ask yourself about your institution, do we have it? Or do we need to partner to get it? And that is why so many of the answers and the solutions to digital preservation that work quite well are partnering with other organizations. For the new partnerships, we need to ask ourselves, with content creators, the people who are creating the digital content, what is their role? I always ask people, are they for you or against you? And you need to make sure that you're working with them and making it easy for them to contribute their content to your digital preservation solution tool repository. We want to collaborate on preservation programs. In some cases, we have differences by different types of institutions, and we need to think about what commonalities and common languages, some of the things that we'll look at during the rest of the morning here, can we use to make sure that these new partnerships are easy to build and are sustainable. We need to understand your scope. Ask yourself some questions. Who are we preserving for? Who's our intended audience or our designated community? Are professors and researchers bringing you boxes of laptops and disks saying it's yours on the day they retire? Are departments across your community willingly giving you records they're supposed to, or do you need to really keep after them? Some other things to think about. What should we be preserving? We need to select for preservation of materials in the traditional sense. We need to select what we are going to digitize right at this point. And we also need to select what we are going to digitally preserve for the long term. What are we going to give long-term access to? how will we preserve it? The idea of what methods and solutions are out there is important as well. And I guess the main thing, one of the main things that we're going to be driving at during the day today is how do we assure it's accessible in the long term? Are there methods of quality assurance, of checking and validating material so it continues to stay as we want it to stay in the long term? So those are some of the things that we need to think about while we are building out our organization with partnerships and while we're developing the scope of our digital preservation project. We have some questions that I want you to think about. Are these fact or fiction? And take a look at these and see what you think at this point. And then I'm going to go over some of the things that we have found in our surveys, in our discussions with organizations that are doing digital preservation. Well, is digital preservation more challenging and complex than preservation of analog objects? Well, we think it is because the whole idea of benign neglect isn't possible. We can't let things sit on the shelves and hope that they deteriorate slowly. There's a quicker deterioration in some cases with our digital materials. And marrying those kind of technical problems with curatorial problems is difficult. Even talking with each other can be a challenge. So this is a fact. We need to think about the challenges of communicating the concerns of digital preservation, and we need to think about the fact that this is something that is, in some cases, coming around more quickly, and we have to keep a closer eye on over the long term. Another question, we can't do anything, or another statement, we can't do anything because we don't have all the answers. Well, what we're going to suggest today is start now. Start exploring, start piloting some projects, and think about what you can do for digital preservation. Digital preservation is a technical problem. Well, actually, as we've seen, it gets broader. It's more than technical because we need that organizational commitment. We need policies and we need infrastructure to sort out all of that organizational activity that we've talked about. We're waiting for the perfect solution. Well, right now, it probably is not one perfect solution. There's no ultimate solution that's clear to us now, but whatever solutions there are going to be complex, but they're going to rely on the principles of archives and of good technology as things, as we've used the archival principles in the past. And you'll see that in just a few moments while I talk about the basics of some of the systems that are out there. The last thing that we've heard, and this has been more in the past couple of years than some of these other bullet points or some of these other questions, but people say in the current financial environment, we just can't move forward. And actually, what we're suggesting is the current financial environment may allow us the time to do the necessary research and planning. Start planning and partnering now. It may not be that you go out and you grab a system immediately. It may be more that you're doing a little bit of research and then you're starting to pilot and partner with others and go forward that way. So I think the idea of moving forward and looking at the concerns and doing your research and your questioning now is a very good and very smart way to go. Now, in many of our libraries and archives, that large animal in the back of the room there is and I think it's a little bit easier to show that than the albatross that might be around our necks, but the animal in the back of the room is digital preservation. So how do we get this elephant over here not to charge, but to sit down and perform and cooperate with us? That's what we're going to look at over our next couple of slides. And one of the ways that we suggest moving forward with this is the idea of developing a policy environment for digital preservation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that environment, and I'm going to give you a couple of sort of pesky definitions, some definitions and things to make us have a level playing field as we talk about this type of activity. So, the policy environment. A couple of quotes to set the stage here. Lynn Brindley from the British Library made a comment that perhaps digital preservation is the wrong label or wrong term to use when we're talking to our communities and we're talking to our stakeholders. Maybe we should be using preserving for long-term access. That might be a way to gain more traction with the public if we use that different terminology. And I think you're going to see during our discussion, during our slides here, the idea of preserving for long-term access being extremely central to everything that we talk about. So that was a very good statement to sort of hang our hats on. Now, Ann Kenny, who is now the library director for Cornell University Libraries, said, "Too often, organization undertakes responsibility for digital stewardship without first ensuring that necessary policies and controls are in place, or that the institution itself views digital preservation as a core mandate." So a couple things to emphasize here. The idea of getting some of these policies, procedures, controls to deal with the human resources, the financial resources, the organizational concerns that we have, and then getting digital preservation as a core mandate. Yes, it was just a few years ago when we were talking about digitization as a core mandate and a core activity that would go up there right along with cataloging, with interlibrary loan, with reference. And so now, in addition to adding digitization, we need to think about preserving the digital material that we create. So these are two sort of phrases that we hang our hats on a lot, two quotes to help us think about what direction we should be going in our digital preservation program building as we move forward. From the Trustworthy Digital Repositories material, TDR, which is mentioned here, we have a couple of good definitions and goals of long-term access and digital preservation. And I'm going to go on to another definition as well in our next slide too. But the definition here is managed activities necessary for ensuring both the long-term maintenance of a byte stream and continued accessibility of its contents. So we're looking at really collection maintenance, which is another term for preservation, collection maintenance for our digital collections, and then also continued accessibility of the byte stream's contents, of any amount of material that we have digitally for as long as we need to have it be accessible. Our goal? Well, we have a goal that future users are going to be able to do all of these things: discover, retrieve, render, bring back, manipulate, interpret, and use digital information in the face of constantly changing technology. And I think the most important things that I would consider in this goal is the idea of manipulation. If you have a large-scale data set, are you going to be able to save that so that you can make that data work with each other again in the future? And using digital information, the idea that we can come back and utilize that information at a future time is really one of the cornerstones of our digital preservation activity. So, just a couple of things to look at for our definitions and goals there. Now, another definition that I think is really good is that in 2007, the Preservation and Reformatting section of the American Library Association developed a set of digital preservation definitions. They actually did a three-part set: short, medium, and long, but we like the short and medium definitions very well, and we wanted to talk about those for just a few minutes. This was partly in response to a number of American Library Association presidents constantly being asked questions about the association's position with this increasingly important issue with digital preservation. They came up with 3 levels of definitions, and I'm going to sort of emphasize the most important facets of the short and medium definitions. With the short definition, digital preservation combines policies, strategies, and action that ensure access to digital content over time. So we're looking again at ensuring access, and how do we do it? We have a number of policies that are the basis of where we're going to go. The medium definition gets a little bit more specific. We're combining all those things, and we're going to have access to content that's born digital or converted to digital format. So this can be material that is coming into you in digital form, or things that in your library, your archive, or your historical society that you are digitizing. We're going to be able to work with these materials regardless of those challenges of file corruption, media failure, and other technological change that we've talked about. And here's where I think the most important part of this definition is. The goal of digital preservation is the most accurate rendering possible of authenticated content over time. So it stays the same, and you are able to bring it up and render it again and again to the people who need it from the same type of direction and the same material, and give them the same material to use. One last thing I wanted to talk about here is that we've seen some vocabulary differences and some things that we need to consider for policies for our practices and procedures. JISC in the UK has said that disaster recovery strategies and backup systems aren't sufficient to ensure survival and access to authentic digital resources over time. So it's not good for long-term maintenance. A backup is more of a short-term data recovery solution following loss or corruption, and it's fundamentally different to an electronic preservation archive. So we've talked about the vocabulary differences, and this is one of the key ones. I think that every organization does some level of backup. I'm hoping that we find that, but we need to go beyond that and think about, do you know how often digital assets are backed up at your library and your institution? And how do we know when, where, and how this is done? And knowing that is an extremely important sort of cornerstone of some of the digital preservation activities that you're going to be doing. So with that in mind, we've talked around and sort of led up to the idea of digital preservation policies, and I am going to go ahead and turn things back over to Liz, and she's going to talk about some survey work that we've done recently on digital preservation with institutions throughout the country.
Okay, so moving on to our next, hold on one moment. Moving on to our next slide, as Tom said, we're going to look at digital preservation surveys. Tom and I have been surveying all types of libraries and cultural heritage organizations regarding preservation readiness since 2005. We've looked at creation of we believe that the creation of policies and plans help demonstrate the organization's commitment to digital preservation. And this is critical for those of you who are interested in providing a trustworthy repository. So, one of the things that we wanted to share with you was where other peer organizations are in relation to incorporating digital preservation in their mission or their purpose. In 2011, in the February 2011, I did a survey of the ARL libraries, the independent research libraries, and about 20 major public libraries. Of those that responded, 56% indicated that they had incorporated digital preservation in their mission and purpose, 30% were planning, and 12% had not done so. What we would like to do now is see where you are. And I'm going to turn it over to Carissa to explain how we're going to do this poll.
So everyone should see the preservation commitment poll now above the chat facility in your browser window, and simply click on either yes, planning, or no or don't know to respond, please.
Oh, this is great. Look at all of it going up so quickly. How neat.
So we're around 40% with yes, and about 33 to 35% with planning. And right now, no is about 17%, going up a little bit, 18%. So those are some interesting figures, and we have don't know, and that's something I would say let's check and see what you're considering as far as taking a look at mission and purpose statements and thinking about the preservation of digital holdings. That would be something I would check, and we might be able to see people divide a little bit more between the yes, planning, and no in the future as well. Great.
Right. So your planning is pretty close to our 2011 survey group. Your no is a little bit higher, and of course your yes is a little bit lower. So one of the goals would be for you to incorporate a statement about your commitment to preservation. The second survey is how are you funding? Addresses the funding, the resource allocation to achieve that mission. So let's move to the second poll. In the 2011 survey, 67% of organizations said that they had funding plans. 31% said no, and 2% didn't know. So while you're taking the second poll, I'll share with you a little bit of information regarding sources of funding. The majority of the organizations are self-funding their digital preservation initiatives. The areas of their budgets that are supporting it, the top one is the library's IT budget. The second choice is the preservation budget, and then they go to grants. So let's see, how are we doing here? Oops. Okay, well, again, you're pretty close on the no, and reaching up there with the yes, that you have made a commitment. This is very important also to the trustworthiness. We found in a lot of our surveys that organizations don't have separate budgets. When you go through an audit and certification activity, they are looking to see whether you have a business plan, a financial plan, outside of your regular library or archive operating budget. Many times we put the preservation activities into collections or preservation or some other area. The last series of questions is whether you have developed a digital preservation policy or a digital preservation plan. And here you see much lower results. Only 18% said yes, 66.7% said it's in development, and 13% said no. Remember, the development of a digital preservation plan is required to be for an OAIS compliant system. So whether you are locally implementing or whether you are outsourcing to a third party, you need to find out whether they have a plan and what it says. And there are a number of very good models. So here we have the poll still coming in.
So about 10% with yes, and then a pretty good amount, over 50%, have in development. There are some that are saying no. We have a little bit bigger group of no's, but this is certainly something that we can start to work on. That's around 30%, I'd guess. And then with don't know, maybe about 7.5 to 8%. So I would say this is an area where you can start seeing some of the policies that we talk about and we might suggest today, and start looking at those a little bit more and thinking about what you can develop within your institution, and that will help you bring those numbers up in the survey results.
So one of the things that we look at is progress in this policy development. And we asked specific areas where, for policy development, where digital holdings have been incorporated. In 2005 to 2008, we had about 180 responses to our readiness assessment. And at that time, 31% of them had incorporated digital holdings into their mission. 28% had incorporated into collection development, 27% into emergency preparedness, and only 21% into digital preservation. The greatest, progress was in the rights area. But even as late as 2008, it was just a bit over 30%. The areas that we're most concerned about is this emergency preparedness. Many institutions have preservation plans, emergency plans, but they are not incorporating digital holdings. So flash forward. Come on. Oops, wrong one. Sorry, guys. Flash forward. This is a little bit hard to read. The orange line for those same categories is yes, the blue line is no, and the purple line is being developed. And what this is there were 64 respondents to this survey, and just around 35%, 35 of them had done strategic planning, had incorporated digital holdings into strategic planning. Rights management, again, continues to be strong, with close to 50% of them having plans. Where we've seen significant growth is in the preservation category, this middle category here. We're seeing a large number of in development. And emergency preparedness still lags along with collection development.
So the next thing that we're going to take a look at is some of the standards, some of the best practices that are out there, and how to do some level of assessment of what your needs are, and assessment of the environment out there in general. So let me move forward for just a real quick interview of this. Most of you are aware that digital preservation is generally defined in the Open Archival Information System, which defines the 6 functions of a digital archive: ingest, archival storage, data management, administration, access, and preservation planning. However, this is not an implementation plan. It was originally developed by NASA, and it's as a framework for each community that adopts OAIS, and they need to develop specific criteria needed by their digital content. What we see in the library, archives, and cultural heritage community is that the Trustworthy Digital Repositories concept is really the defining document for libraries and cultural heritage organizations. Today, most of the current approaches to digital preservation that we're using are OAIS based, and one of the key functions that you can see at the bottom of our list is preservation planning. So now I promise to only show you one more of these slides on OAIS. We don't want to go super technical, but I think that there are some really good things to think about and consider here. And you will hear me talking about a lot of activities that you'll hear in general archival procedure. So there are four entities, and you can potentially see on the left-hand side of your screen, producers, the content creators that we talked about before, and suppliers. We have on the other side the consumers, the users. This is sort of the designated community or the subset who are expected to be able to understand the archived information. We have management and administration, who are the policymakers, and then the other entity is the archive. So our explanation is that that information creator or producer has some information. And that information in a submission information package, or SIP, is ingested by the archive. It's really accessioned with appropriate information, which we call metadata, so that the accession is understandable. Its content, its context, its structure, and its technical requirements are all understandable. After ingestion, the information is stored in the archive and managed along with its metadata. So there is a lot of activity that is done as part of data management and administration to make sure that the material stays viable within the repository. As appropriate, preservation actions are taking place. When there are technological changes that we have to deal with, file format changes, etc. Those preservation actions are taken, and then on the other side, through asking via queries and gaining result sets through orders, we have consumers who access the information and the metadata they need to be able to use it from the archive, and they are actually pulling the material out through a dissemination information package, or a DIP. So this is one of the sort of looking under the hood type of things that we can do when we think about the digital preservation systems that are out there. So with the idea of the need for policies, the idea of the need for digital preservation, and then some definitions and looking at some of the backbones here, I'm going to turn things back over to Liz for a few minutes to talk about digital preservation planning and developing your digital preservation plan.
So as Tom mentioned, preservation planning is one of the key components of the OAIS. There are 8 discrete sections in a digital preservation plan, and I'm going to review these very quickly. The first one is the rationale for digital preservation. It may include a mission statement that reflects your organization's commitment to undertaking long-term access to digital content. It should include a statement of who you are preserving the collections for, what some of your resources are that, in general, you would be preserving. The second section is the statement of organizational commitment, which would include your demonstration of staffing that would support the preservation program, as well as your statement of financial commitment. The financial commitment statement is generally brief. It describes the revenue sources or revenue streams that will support the preservation program, and it also includes your exit strategy. Now, exit strategies are generally not something that we in libraries and cultural heritage organizations generally think about. Once we establish a program, we assume that we're going to be continuing it. However, because we are taking responsibility for the creator or the producer's content and guaranteeing them, committing to them that we will provide long-term access, we need to therefore put into our digital preservation program a statement of what we will do if we no longer can support the digital preservation repository. Again, if you are operating your own repository, you need to say what you will do. If you are contracting with a third-party organization, you need to know before you sign on that dotted line what their exit strategy is. One of the areas that we have spent the most amount of time on is the actual preservation activity. The authentication of the resources, the quality control, all are aspects that have to be addressed in your preservation plan. You will state what formats will be preserved, what potential preservation actions will be taken, and in general, what systems will be used. On the section on metadata creation, you're going to define what metadata will be required to assure the long-term access that will support preservation actions, record preservation actions. Typically, all of this is bundled into the preservation metadata standard premise. Roles and responsibilities. Again, we may know what our roles are and what our responsibilities are, but as part of the transparency requirement for OAIS, we need to make it very clear what the roles and responsibilities are, not only of our institution, but of the producers, the content creators, as well as the content users. This section will address rights issue, liability, and any membership requirements should there be any. The seventh section addresses training and education. This is absolutely critical in the digital environment to support the ongoing learning of those who are depositing as well as those who are managing the system. It is due in large part to the constant changes in the legal environment, the technological environment, and the policy environment in which we operate. Plans need to frame how repository staff will continue to be current. Lastly, we have a requirement for monitoring and review. In this requirement, it's defined very broadly, and it includes both technology monitoring, what software and formats are still current. It also includes monitoring of the collections themselves. Sorry, folks. And the environment needs to be monitored. So the plan includes actually a great deal, but we've seen plans that have been developed that are 3 and 4 and 5 pages in length. So there are lots of examples out there. If you are going to develop a preservation plan, this is something that needs to be undertaken by a team. It's not something that is generally done in isolation. The members of the team would include the different functional units from across your library, archive, or museum, key stakeholders, including content producers and their representatives, as well as long-term users. This group will begin by defining that rationale, the purpose, the mission of the digital initiative. They will want to review what your mandate is for preservation. If you are a state library or state archives, you may have a legal mandate to preserve for long-term access. As librarians and archivists and museum professionals, we have a professional or societal mandate. And then there are ethical mandates. So one of the things you need to do is sit down and review what types of mandates you have. What do your contracts for electronic resources require of you? Are you the ones that are taking on the obligation of preservation and long-term access? Then you need to identify who your designated community is. The designated community is a term out of OAIS that indicates specifically who you are creating the digital repository for. And many times, libraries and cultural heritage organizations will state that they are creating it for the producers or creators of the content, the faculty, graduate students. They may also specify a specific group of end users. This is usually a more targeted community than the general library or archives users. So implementation and development of the plan begins with discussions of selection. Selection of your digital resources that would be put into a preservation repository is based on your mandate. Go back to that mandate. What are your user needs, short-term, long-term? What is the nature of the material in your collection? Is it born digital, reformatted? Are there data sets? Are there audio and video? Understand the materials that you have. And those materials with a strong mandate are the best candidates for digital preservation. Next, you have to look at what your collections look like. What is the size and format? Whether they're in an obsolete or near obsolete format. Where are the collections stored? On servers, hard drives, DVDs, CDs? You should be making some of these decisions based on your current established collection development policy. You need to state what your vendor may be responsible for. As you implement, understand the requirements for gathering the collections and the ingest requirements. Gather that information from your producer. Storage. Storage options are many and varied today, from locally managed to outsourced to co-locations as well as the cloud. When you consider your storage options, it's not just a matter of cost that you're going to consider and technological capabilities, but also look at security. What level can they authenticate to? Is authentication at the user group level, like many of our circulation and OPACs are? Or is it down to the actual item level? You will need to determine what level of authentication and access will be required for each of your collections as you pick these storage and management systems. Access. Who will have access to your preservation repository? Will the preservation repository support access by content owners, end users, staff, or will access be limited to system administrators? Will the repository, in other words, be a dark archive with very limited access or an open repository that performs the function of a discovery system and a preservation repository? Will you need to replicate the producer's access system? And producer's access system may be your digital asset management in the library or your content management system. Your preservation plan will detail the answers to planning for long-term preservation and access. As we've already noted, you will require organizational support. So we recommend developing a skills inventory that'll allow you to make decisions regarding the organizational support for the repository. Do you have the needed skills? Will you train existing staff? Will you hire new staff? Will you adopt a third-party solution because you don't have the required technical skills? If you take that route, your skill requirements will differ from those who are running their own solutions. Many of our early implementers started with the technology side, but as you've already heard us say today, we're recommending that you start by developing your preservation plan. As you can, continue to answer what you can today, and then complete other parts as you develop the system. There are many pieces that you can do now, and your digital services team in your organization may already have begun this process. We use a process for understanding our digital collections that was outlined by the folks at the Digital Curation Center through a publication called Drambora. It's an audit tool developed by the DCC. Tom, am I doing this?
Yes.
Okay. Traditionally, we've looked at digital collection and the risks to it from a technological perspective. We've looked at obsolescence of media, obsolescence of operating systems, and obsolescence of hardware. However, for digital collections, we need to consider a wider range of risks. In the in the early days, we were really very concerned about format obsolescence. And while that does occur, the major formats have been very stable. So migration to new formats has been limited among those major formats. It winds up that our greater risks are associated with organizational issues. Will the organization that stewards and curates collections continue to support these collections? Will there be adequate security to protect the physical locations of our collections? Will our socio-cultural environment support the cultural heritage environment? What political changes can have a major impact on the support our organizations receive? We know that changes in governorships, changes in state houses can increase funding to us and can also decrease funding to us. They can create unfunded mandates. We also need to look at legal changes that impact our ability to support our collections over time. Do we have the contractual rights to preserve collections under our stewardship? Have you modified your deeds of gift? And when you license content, what are you legally committing to? We have seen a number of organizations wind up with licensed content that we thought the vendor was going to be preserving for the long term, appearing on our doorsteps on hard drives with letters that say, "You're now responsible for this." With all the hurricanes, earthquakes, and wars that have occurred in the last decade, how have they or will they impact preservation? We know that CDs and DVDs do not fare well in mud, and putting our backups across town is no longer an adequate strategy. In fact, with today's hurricane, across the state isn't even adequate. So we're looking at cross-country and cross-hemisphere becoming the norm for our vital collections. Determining if you're meeting your mandate can be done fairly easily. You need to sit down and begin looking and detailing your organizational structure, your financial environment. You can begin by creating an inventory of your digital assets, categorizing these assets in terms of the volume of data that you have that's in TIFF, JPEG, WAV, AVI, all the different formats. How many files you have in that format. Your IT staff can probably run a program that can elicit that information for you. You're going to need to know what software, hardware, and operating systems were used to create the content. And if there's been any migration, what formats and software are currently being used. You can create a definition of your current storage environment, the age, your maintenance routines, and where what formats your backups are held in: tape, disk, hard drive, and in general where they're located. And then you can begin to describe the metadata that's available to support your digital resources. In the preservation environment, we tend to look at technical, structural, and administrative as their key metadata. So, in conclusion, here are some of the key ideas. Make a commitment to long-term preservation, long-term access by including it in your mission. Tie your program to your mandates, be they legal mandates, moral, or community, and assure the sustainability of your digital collection. Demonstrate that through resource allocation, and this is financial resources as well as technical. Make a list of the specific needs that you identified through the risk assessment, and then possible solutions, how you're going to move forward. And then implement a program of monitoring and review where you designate who will be responsible for monitoring and the frequency of the review. Generally, we recommend an annual review of your preservation plan. And then have a technology platform that supports the specific needs. There may be multiple solutions for the different collections and different user needs that you have identified in your mandate review.
So, just a couple of take-home concepts, some action ideas that we can take from what we've heard and talked about this morning. I think the idea of using standards and best practices, and some of those we've seen, is an important thing to work towards. Our solutions might sound complex, but they don't have to be. We can really see some of the solutions that are here, some of the policies that people have developed, and we don't have to wait for the perfect solution or reinvent the wheel. We can test some of the ideas, the processes, the methodologies that are out there. We do have to, though, plan for both organizational and technological change and challenges. The organizational challenges like buy-in and budgeting and staff time may be more difficult than those technical challenges of creating a digital repository. So learn what others are doing. Don't reinvent things, and use standards whenever you can. The time is really right for solutions. There's a lot of data out there, and there are going to be a lot of issues with digital preservation very soon. So the market for these tools is coming. Be an informed consumer and take a look at what is out there and how that meets your needs. So we have just a few moments, and I wanted to see if there are questions that you might have, and you can enter those in the chat area related to some of the things that we have talked about during the day.
For anyone who's interested in asking a question, we have a few moments. Please type it into the chat box that I indicated previously is in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen.
We can use these questions also to inform our next two webinars in the survey. So please make sure you do send us along questions.
Okay, so the first question from Amber: any suggestions for overcoming barriers to organizational buy-in, specifically to convincing those outside the library?
Yes, Tom, do you want to take this or
Sure.
should I?
I can talk about this a little bit. One of the things that we have suggested is, in addition to a digital preservation team looking at these type of activities, you do need to get those stakeholders interested. And there are some ways that you can do that. You can talk about the collections that matter to your university or your community that sort of make you unique, the type of things that are very mission driven and central to your mission. And there may be some records, some documents that are important to the president, provost's office, the mayor or city council's office, that type of thing. So take a look at what materials they have and then let them know that in some cases you will be able to work with them and either bring those collections into your library or at least consider bringing them into an institution-wide digital preservation solution or digital repository.
We find also that senior administration, the finance department, those types of folks are very convinced by data. And if you can do the risk assessment, if you can look at how much content you have today, how much content you're going to have in the future, and do the analysis of what's obsolete, what may be obsolete, what you're doing for backup strategies, and quantify this, that can make a very compelling argument. Look at what the mandates are. If you're supporting institutional records, those mandates may come from FASB, which is the National Accounting Standards. They may come from actual legislative, but those are some ways to convince people. Also, if you go for grants, the National Science Foundation is requiring data management plans. Libraries preservation programs fit nicely into that.
Okay,
We have a
we
question
have one more
on
question on the chat.
model policies existing repositories are using. And one of the things that I would consider there is the idea that those are going to be covered, I think, in some of the next 2 sessions. So there are some possibilities there.
We can also send along, I can send to DuraSpace a list of policies that we hand out in our multi-day workshops on this topic that may serve as models. So Clarissa, I will send that to you today.
That's perfect. We can broadcast it out. We have one more question on the chat, and then we'll have to close for questions today. We have a question of, not all of us work with a large staff. What advice do you have to those who will probably need to write the draft of any preservation policy alone?
I would say taking a look at the weblyography that Liz is going to supply and look at some of those model policies and see if those fit the size and type of your collection. And then the second thing is that whole idea of partnerships that we talked about. Are there sort of multi-institution partnerships where you can build sort of a larger corpus of people who are looking at this problem in between a couple of organizations? That has been a way that some smaller organizations have dealt with these questions. So with those questions in mind, I just wanted to say you've got our contact information. Please contact us with questions related to this session after the session. And I know that Liz and Carissa will be back with you on other sessions in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to them for any closing comments.
Just quickly, Dorothea, a weblyography is like a bibliography, only it's mostly web-based content.
Well, thank you very much, Liz and Tom, for today's fantastic presentation, which is actually the first in our Knowledge Futures Digital Preservation Planning Series hosted by the DuraSpace organization. If you'd like to attend the next 2 webinars in our series that are upcoming, please visit duraspace.org. Also, thanks to everyone for attending today's session. A recording of today's webinar as well as the slides will be emailed to you as well as posted on DuraSpace.org later in the week. We hope you can join us for upcoming webinars, and if you're interested in the DuraSpace organization and the projects that are underneath the DuraSpace umbrella listed on your screen, please feel free to visit the websites. Thanks again and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you, Clarissa.